The first thing to die wasn't the laptop. It was the room's certainty that money could fix anything. "Why is there a kid on my trading floor?" Edward Kott's voice ricocheted off the glass, sharp enough to cut the blue glow from the monitors. The girl didn't flinch. She sat small and steady at the edge of the workstation, hands folded over a scuffed tablet, watching the storm. Kott Capital's lifeline, Edward's custom, air-gapped trading laptop, had flatlined in the middle of a billion-dollar merger. Orders frozen, bots mute, derivatives unhedged. Every minute, without execution, bled money and reputation in equal measure. Maria Walker barked into 2 headsets at once. Elizabeth Appel hammered escalation tickets to the vendor's platinum team. Jessica Lemon stood over the dead keyboard like a surgeon losing the patient. Elite consultants were already on standby. None could reach the black box that wouldn't even boot. Phones rang like sirens, investors demanding updates, a hostile blog post already trending, compliance asking what to tell the exchange. Edward could see it spiraling, headlines, lawsuits, the merger partner walking, and with it, 12 years of being the smartest man in the room. "Kill the risk and prepare a statement," he said hoarsely. "If this doesn't come back online in 5, we go dark." The 3 executives went still. Dark meant losses crystallized. Jobs, too. From the edge of the desk, the girl tilted her head, curious, not scared. And a thought Edward would never have spoken out loud slid in like a draft. What if the answer isn't in the resume pile, but in the corner nobody looks at? Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more captivating stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. "My name is Dolores," she said softly. "May I try?" Jessica exhaled a laugh. "Sweetheart, this isn't a school computer." Edward stared at the inert laptop, then at the clock, then at the girl's unblinking calm. "You have 90 seconds, he said. "It's already dead." As Dolores slid into the chair and woke a terminal most adults in the room didn't recognize, the night rewound itself in Edward's mind. How a flawless system collapsed in seconds, how a merger turned into a countdown, and how a stranger's child ended up inside the most expensive room in his life. For a moment, the entire room just stared. The hum of the air conditioning was the only sound between the soft blue glow of the monitors and the disbelief settling over everyone. Jessica Lemon broke it first with a thin, amused laugh. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice syrupy with condescension, "this isn't YouTube or Minecraft. You don't just click fix all." Dolores didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the laptop's screen, the dead glow reflecting in them like twin mirrors. Edward rubbed his temples. His exhaustion had eaten through the last of his pride. "Fine," he muttered. 5 minutes, it's already dead." Jessica blinked. "Sir, you can't be serious." "I said 5, Edward snapped. "Let her try." Dolores moved into the chair slowly, as if afraid to disturb a sacred space. The laptop looked enormous under her small hands. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, then touched the keyboard, once, twice, deliberate, testing, listening to the rhythm of the keys. Maria Walker folded her arms. "She's a child." Elizabeth Appel didn't speak, but her silence was heavy with judgment. Then the screen flickered. Lines of code scrolled by, white text against black, alive again. Dolores's fingers danced without hesitation. To anyone else, it looked random, like a guessing game. But there was pattern, a cadence. She wasn't typing blindly. She was talking to the machine in its own language. Jessica leaned toward Maria and whispered, What is she even doing? Maria shrugged, though her voice trembled. Command line interface? Maybe? Dolores pressed enter. The cursor blinked twice. A soft tone echoed through the room, the system's first heartbeat in hours. Edward's head jerked up. What did you do? Dolores tilted her head. It's not broken, she said simply. It was told to stop. No one moved. Excuse me? Edward asked, stepping closer. Dolores pointed at the scrolling text. See this loop? It repeats the same instruction forever. Freeze, pause, wait. Whoever wrote it didn't want it to crash. They wanted it to sleep. She began tracing the pattern, explaining in soft bursts that somehow didn't sound childish. It keeps the processors busy, but they never reach the command that tells them to execute trades. That's why the system looks alive but doesn't move. I can cut it off, but I need to know if you want to risk losing data. Maria blinked, speechless. Jessica tried to laugh again, but it came out brittle. You're saying some ghost code told the system to nap? Cute. Not cute, Dolores replied quietly. Dangerous. Her fingers flew again, faster now, confidence replacing hesitation. Edward watched her in silence, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. So calm, so precise. The tension in the room shifted. The adults who'd ruled every meeting suddenly became spectators. A minute later, every monitor in the control room began lighting up. 1, 2, 3. Then, all at once, the wall of black turned into blue light. Graphs pulsing. Feeds reconnecting. Trade lines refreshing. Maria gasped and covered her mouth. Elizabeth whispered, "Oh my God!" Edward staggered back a step, gripping the table. That's impossible. Dolores didn't celebrate. She just stared at the lines of data reappearing on the screen, her brow furrowed. No, she murmured, not impossible, just hidden. Jessica stepped forward, disbelief etched across her face. You didn't really fix it. The backup must have rebooted. Dolores didn't look up. The backup wasn't connected, she said softly. I isolated the loop and restarted the core. The backups are clean now, but someone wrote this intentionally. It's not random error. Edward leaned over her shoulder, studying the code that filled the screen. You're telling me someone did this? Dolores nodded once. A loop like that doesn't appear by accident. It had a trigger, a timer maybe. It's clever. Whoever did it wanted you to think it was corruption, not command. Her calmness unsettled everyone. Edward's pulse hammered in his ears. He looked at the other executives, 3 professionals who had spent their lives mastering this world, and realized that not one of them could explain what just happened. Jessica found her voice again. Are you accusing us of sabotage? I'm not accusing anyone, Dolores replied. But there's still movement inside the system. Something else is running. The words hit like cold water. Edward frowned. Movement? Look. She pointed at a cluster of data streams at the corner of the screen. These aren't system processes. They're live commands coming from an external address. Whoever caused the freeze is still here. Elizabeth whispered, You mean we're being watched? More like they're still working, Dolores said. Copying, maybe deleting. Edward felt his stomach twist. He turned toward his team. How is that possible? We're behind 3 layers of firewalls. Dolores gave a small shrug. Firewalls are doors. You just have to know where the hinges are. For a moment, no one breathed. The monitors pulsed brighter as activity spiked again. A a flash of data that seemed almost sentient, taunting. Jessica clutched her arms, then shut it down. Pull the power. Dolores shook her head. If you do that, you'll destroy everything. The backup's connected now. If they're deleting, a shutdown will finish their job for them. Edward's voice dropped to a near whisper. Then, what do we do? Dolores glanced at him. Find them before they finish. She began typing again, faster than before. Windows opening, tracing routes, freezing streams, isolating packets like someone defusing a bomb. Edward could barely follow. The adults stood behind her, watching their salvation play out in silence. Jessica's expression shifted from contempt to unease. Maria's disbelief softened into awe. Elizabeth crossed herself quietly. Edward's entire empire, his fortune, his legacy, now sat in the hands of a child whose mother cleaned his offices twice a week. 5 minutes earlier, he'd thought she was a distraction. Now every sound of her keystrokes was oxygen. A final command line blinked on the screen. Access denied. Remote user interrupted. The graphs stabilized. The heartbeat of Kott Capital's digital core leveled out, steady and alive. Dolores exhaled and leaned back in the chair. That's all I can do for now, she said softly. But they'll try again. Edward stared at her, not the laptop, not the numbers, her. What are you? He whispered. Dolores gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. Just curious. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was reverence. Somewhere in the corner, a monitor flickered, faint and unseen, a single line of red code sliding beneath the restored system, waiting. And Dolores, noticing the glitch, leaned forward once more. Something's wrong, she murmured. There's still someone inside. The room, once filled with gasps of relief, now held a different kind of silence, sharp, waiting. The monitors glowed steady blue, their reflections painting ghostly hues across everyone's faces. Dolores didn't move from the chair. Her eyes stayed fixed on the corner monitor where a thin red line of text scrolled almost invisibly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Something's wrong, she whispered. There's still someone inside. Edward stepped closer, his voice trembling just enough to betray his fear. What do you mean, someone? Dolores zoomed in on the data logs. A series of access requests flickered. Addresses, timestamps, encryption layers. All legitimate, all masked. It's remote activity, she said softly, but it's using your own system credentials. Jessica let out a nervous laugh. That's impossible. Our network's sealed tighter than Fort Knox. Dolores didn't look up. If it's sealed, how are they still moving? She tapped a few keys, and the room erupted in a cascade of notifications, outbound data transfers, small enough to look like system maintenance, but running at intervals too precise to be random. Maria pressed a hand to her mouth. It's sending information out? Edward's throat tightened. What kind of information? Trading data, client records, encryption keys. The words hit like a blow. Billions of dollars in proprietary algorithms, client strategies, everything that made Kott Capital untouchable, leaking away in real time. Jessica shook her head violently. No, this has to be a diagnostic ghost, some leftover process from the crash. It's not, Dolores said. It's live. Someone's in here, right now. Edward's voice cracked through the tension. Call the cyber team. Call whoever you have to. Maria hesitated. Edward, that could take hours. They'll start over, shut everything down. Then do something, he shouted. Dolores looked up finally, her calm cutting through the panic. I can trace them, but if I stop it wrong, they might destroy everything to cover their tracks. Edward blinked at her. What do you mean, destroy everything? They'll activate a kill script. Wipe your servers, your backups, everything, like it never existed. The air went thin. Edward exhaled shakily. Trace it then, carefully. Dolores nodded once and began typing. The soft rhythm of her keystrokes filled the silence. Quick, deliberate, surgical. The executives stood behind her like statues, the glow from the screens washing over their faces, highlighting every flicker of dread. The monitors came alive again, lines of code snaking across them, each symbol a pulse of danger. On one screen, a map of network nodes shimmered. Tiny white dots representing internal servers, each one connected by blue threads. But through the network's heart, a red thread pulsed, branching outward like veins from a wound. Dolores pointed. That's the breach. Maria swallowed. Can you stop it? I can follow it, Dolores replied. But stopping it too early will warn them. Jessica folded her arms, voice brittle. You're making this sound like a movie. Dolores didn't glance up. It's not a movie if they win. Edward's gaze darted between the screens. Follow it. I want to know who's behind this. The next few minutes unfolded like a countdown. Dolores tracked the code trail, each keystroke drawing her deeper into a maze that seemed designed to mislead. She muttered to herself in fragments. Decoy server, proxy mask, rerouted twice. The red thread jumped across the map. First from New York, then to Singapore, then to Zurich. Finally, it circled back, straight into Kott Capital's private intranet. Edward's breath caught. Wait, you're saying it's inside? Dolores froze. It's using your internal access keys. Jessica frowned. That can't be right. Only we have those. Dolores's fingers stopped on the keyboard. She leaned back slightly, reading the code again, slower this time. The room seemed to tilt. Maria's voice wavered. Dolores? It's not an external attack, she said finally. It's coming from here. Edward stared at her, disbelief twisting his features. From inside this building? She nodded. Someone here wrote the loop that crashed your laptop. They're using the same credentials now to pull data out through a disguised maintenance port. For a long, suffocating second, no one spoke. Jessica broke the silence, voice high. You can't just accuse people. Maybe the hacker stole an access file. Dolores's tone stayed even. The encryption matches an internal signature. It's unique. Not stolen. Edward turned to his team, 3 women he'd trusted with billions. Their faces flickered in the blue light like masks. Maria pale and trembling, Elizabeth rigid, Jessica glaring daggers at the girl. Someone in this room, Edward said slowly, is selling us out. Jessica threw her hands up. Oh, come on. You can't take a child's word for that. Dolores ignored her and kept typing, eyes narrowing. They're trying to cover their path. They know I'm here. How? Edward demanded. Dolores pointed to a new alert flashing across the monitor, a warning in red. Intruder trace detected. She bit her lip. They've seen my trace. The monitors began flickering again. One by one, network nodes blinked red. They're shutting down the routes, Maria cried. Dolores leaned forward, fingers flying. No, they're not shutting them down. They're rewriting them. They're burying the evidence. Edward slammed his fist against the table. Can you stop it? I can slow them down, she said. But if I block too hard, they'll trigger the wipe. Jessica took a step back, whispering, "Oh my God, she's serious." The room was now lit only by the pulse of blue and red, like an emergency beacon inside a digital storm. Dolores worked faster, hands a blur, eyes unblinking. She set traps, rerouted scripts, mirrored data to hidden partitions. Every few seconds, she whispered updates under her breath. Redirecting stream, isolating packet, counter-command accepted. Finally, the red lines froze. The system stopped fighting back. Edward exhaled, chest heaving. Is it over? Dolores shook her head. No, they pulled back. Wema. She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. Because they know we're watching now. And because they don't need to hide anymore. Maria frowned. What does that mean? Dolores pointed to a single blinking notification, one message left behind in the code's metadata, a signature more chilling than any virus. On the screen, in plain text, it read, "Hello, Edward." The words blinked twice, then vanished. Dolores looked up at him. They're not finished. Edward's hands trembled as the weight of realization settled in. The ghost wasn't gone. It had just spoken. And somewhere deep within Kott Capital's network, unseen fingers began moving again. The words still pulsed in Edward's mind. Hello, Edward. They had been burned into every screen before vanishing like a whisper swallowed by silence. The room felt colder now. Even the hum of the computers had changed, more like breathing than machinery. Dolores sat rigid in her chair, eyes locked on the lines of code still cascading down the monitor. Her voice, when it came, was low and calm. They didn't just want you to know they were here, she said. They wanted you to know they're one of you. Jessica exhaled sharply and rubbed her temples. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. You're letting a 12-year-old scare you with ghost stories. Edward's gaze cut through her. Quiet. He turned back to Dolores. Can you find them? Dolores nodded once. If they left that message, they left a path. People always do, even the smart ones. She began tracing again, her small hands a blur on the keys. Windows opened, commands stacked, a dozen screens flashing at once. Edward and his executives hovered behind her like spectators in a courtroom, their reflections layered over the monitors like ghosts of their own. A minute passed. Then Dolores stopped. Her expression didn't change, but her voice went colder. It's an internal device. Someone in this room. The air fractured. Maria's hands flew to her mouth. Elizabeth took a step back. Jessica scoffed, trying to laugh but finding no breath for it. That's insane. Dolores didn't look at her. She tapped a key, and a name appeared on the screen. Plain, sharp, undeniable. User, J. Lemon, exec-gun. The silence after that was absolute. Jessica froze. That's my device, she said quietly. But that doesn't mean... Dolores interrupted softly. It's the same credential that sent the first command to shut down the system. Edward stared at the screen like it was a weapon. You're saying Jessica? Dolores nodded. She triggered the crash. And she's been siphoning trade data to an offshore server ever since. Jessica's color drained, but she tried to recover fast. That's absurd. I wasn't even logged in when the system crashed. The timestamp's wrong. The credentials could have been cloned. Dolores turned one monitor toward her. They weren't. She pulled up a second set of logs, access patterns, packet routes, login fingerprints. Your device has been connecting to offshore servers tied to multiple shell corporations, she said. One of them belongs to Vulcan Financial Group. Edward's breath hitched. Vulcan. He stared at Jessica. That's Weston Vulcan's company. Jessica's voice broke. Edward, please. You sold him our trading model, Edward said, disbelief hollowing his words. For a moment, Jessica didn't deny it. Then something in her hardened. You'd have ruined us all chasing your ego, she shouted. You kept pushing bigger trades, tighter margins, bragging about being untouchable. You were gambling with our future. I just evened the game. Her voice rose into a shrill crescendo, years of resentment spilling out. You think loyalty is bought with stock options? You treat everyone like replaceable parts, and you're shocked one of them finally broke the machine. Maria backed away from her, shaking her head. Jessica, how could you? Jessica whirled on her. Don't pretend you didn't see it. We've all been drowning in his perfection for years. Edward slammed his hand on the desk. Enough! The sound cracked through the tension like a gunshot. He took a slow step toward her. You betrayed every one of us. You risked the jobs of thousands because you couldn't stand being number two. Jessica's composure faltered. You built this place like a cult, she said, voice trembling. You worship your own code. I just wanted to survive it. Edward stared at her. The woman he'd trusted with every secret ledger, every client. And for a moment, he looked older, smaller. And now? He asked quietly. Do you feel like you survived? Jessica didn't answer. Dolores typed a few final commands, her voice breaking the stillness. I've locked her access. Edward turned. Locked? I created a loopback vault, Dolores explained. Every file she touched now leads to a sealed directory. She can't delete or alter anything, not even if she tries to use an external key. Jessica's head snapped toward her. You little... Security burst through the door before the insult could finish. Edward had already made the call. The two guards moved fast, one taking Jessica's arm as she tried to twist free. Don't do this, Edward, she shouted. You think she's your savior, but she's a virus. You'll regret letting her touch your system. Edward didn't flinch. I already regret letting you touch it. The guards dragged her out as she kept shouting, words dissolving into echo. The room fell silent again, the hum of electronics filling the space like a low requiem. Maria exhaled shakily. I can't believe it. All this time. Elizabeth stared at the door, stunned. She was with us for years. Edward didn't speak. He just looked at Dolores, really looked at her. The little girl who had walked into his chaos and turned it inside out. Dolores, still at the terminal, ran one more command. It's done, she said. Her trail's locked. You can hand everything to investigators without fear of deletion. Edward nodded slowly. How do you know how to do all this? Dolores hesitated, then shrugged slightly. I learned from online forums. People post puzzles, code riddles. I just like solving them. Edward almost smiled, not out of amusement, but out of awe. You realize you just saved my company. Dolores's eyes met his, calm and steady. No, she said softly. I just stopped the bleeding. Whoever helped her isn't finished. Edward's faint smile vanished. You think there's more? Dolores nodded once. Look, on the bottom corner of the monitor, a new icon blinked faintly. A file Jessica couldn't have made. Dolores opened it. Inside was a single encrypted message, time-stamped 10 minutes ago. sent from an anonymous address. It read, "She was just the door. The house is still mine." The words hung in the air like smoke. Edward stared at them, dread creeping down his spine. Dolores's fingers hovered over the keys again, her calm voice returning. "Then we find who's still inside." For the first time in hours, the glass walls of the command room stood quiet. The storm had passed, or so it seemed. Jessica Lemon was gone, her betrayal laid bare. Edward sat at the edge of the conference table, rubbing a shaking hand over his face. Maria poured coffee but didn't drink it. Elizabeth whispered something about contacting investors at dawn. Dolores, still at the laptop, was the only one who hadn't moved since security took Jessica away. Her eyes scanned the monitors with the calm precision of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then it dropped. A piercing tone shattered the silence, not from one screen, but all of them. Alert. External access detected. Every monitor turned red. Code scrolled violently, windows flashing open faster than anyone could read them. Maria flinched, spilling her cup. "What now?" Dolores's voice cut through the noise, quiet but steady. "It's starting again." Edward jumped to his feet. "You said her access was locked." "It was," Dolores replied, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. "But someone's using her credentials from outside. It's not Jessica. Someone copied her keys." The words hit harder than any explosion. Elizabeth took a step toward the door. "We need to shut it all down before it spreads again." Dolores shook her head without looking up. "If we shut down, we'll lose everything permanently. This isn't an infection. It's a purge." Edward froze. "A purge?" "They're deleting your data from every backup, every external server, every mirrored node. It's coordinated. All systems tied to your firm's network are being wiped clean." The realization landed like a gut punch. Edward's empire, thousands of accounts, billions in data, disintegrating right before his eyes. "Call the tech division," Maria shouted. "Call anyone!" Dolores didn't stop typing. "No time. They've hijacked the response systems too. They're moving faster than your own firewall can log them." On the central monitor, digital walls flashed red and orange like a city under bombardment. Every failed defense felt like an explosion. Edward paced behind her, his voice cracking. "They planned this. They knew we'd lock her out." "Yes," Dolores said. "Jessica wasn't working alone. She was the door." "Then who's behind it?" he demanded. Dolores's fingers paused for half a second, just long enough for him to see her face tighten. "Someone who knows your architecture, maybe even helped build it." Edward's stomach turned. "Vulcan," he whispered. "Weston Vulcan." Maria gasped. "Your old partner?" Edward nodded grimly. "He left the company 5 years ago after I refused to sell our algorithms. Swore he'd build his own system. He couldn't, not without what I had." Dolores's eyes flicked across new data. "Then he's trying to take it." The attack spread like wildfire. Every second, red lines blinked across the digital map. Singapore, London, Zurich, New York, mirrored servers collapsing one after another. Edward's voice was barely audible. "We're losing everything." Dolores didn't respond. Her concentration deepened. What she was doing now wasn't repair. It was creation. Her hands moved with precision, rewriting code at a speed that bordered on impossible. To Edward, it looked like watching music, a rhythm of logic and intuition. Her commands layered over each other like an orchestra in motion. Redirect, isolate, encrypt, divert. Maria leaned in, eyes wide. "What is she doing?" Elizabeth whispered. "I think she's rewriting the firewall while it's running." Edward blinked. "That's not possible." Dolores's tone was calm but strained. "It's possible if you don't care about breaking the rules." Lines of her code wrapped the company's core systems like a spinning cocoon. The external breach slammed against it, sparks of digital collision lighting up every monitor. "They're still in," she muttered. "But they don't know what's real anymore." "What does that mean?" Edward asked. "I'm feeding them ghost data," Dolores said. "Fake systems, empty databases that look real. They'll chase shadows while I block their real path." "Can that work?" Maria asked. Dolores nodded faintly. "For a little while." Edward's pulse thundered. "Do it!" She hit enter. The room's light dimmed for a heartbeat. Then half the monitors flickered back to blue. "They're confused," she said. "They're attacking the decoys." For a moment, hope surged. Then a new warning blared. "Primary node compromised. Internal server 03. Override initiated." Dolores's eyes widened. "No, they're adapting!" Edward's voice rose. "Can you stop it?" "I can try," she said, "but they're not attacking the company anymore. They're attacking me." "What?" "The code I wrote. They're tracing it back, trying to reverse engineer my commands to find the real system again." Maria's panic broke through. "Edward, we have to pull the plug!" Dolores's voice snapped sharp and fast. "If you cut power, every server they touched goes dark, permanently. You'll never recover your data. Ever." Edward froze. The decision weighed like a physical thing. Pull the plug and save the remains. Or trust a child to win an invisible war. He looked at Dolores. "You said you could slow them down." Her hands trembled slightly over the keys. "I can do more than slow them. I can turn their attack back on them, but it'll take everything." "What do you mean, everything?" She looked up at him, eyes glowing in the blue light. "It'll break your system temporarily. You'll be offline, blind, for about 5 minutes, but if I'm right, they'll take the bait." Maria shook her head. "That's insane. What if it doesn't come back on?" Edward's jaw tightened. "We've already lost too much. Do it." Dolores nodded once, then began typing again. Faster than ever. The keystrokes echoed like rain on glass. She rewrote the system's encryption protocol in real time, converting live data streams into false traffic, embedding trace packets into every connection. Edward could see her logic unfold like an intricate maze. A final line blinked. "Engage counterfeit grid? Yen." Dolores hit Y. Every monitor went black. For 5 long seconds, the room became darkness and heartbeats. Then, a single pulse of white light. The monitors reignited. Red alerts vanished one by one, replaced with green icons. Access blocked. Data mirrors secure. External connection terminated. Dolores exhaled slowly. They took the bait. Their servers are choking on our decoys. Edward let out a sound that was half laugh, half disbelief. "You did it," but Dolores didn't smile. Her gaze fixed on one screen still flashing, a private terminal in the far corner, previously untouched. She typed a command. The response came instantly. Vantage connected. Her face went pale. "It's not over." Edward turned. "Whose Vantage?" Dolores's voice was a whisper. The real one behind all this. The lights flickered again. Somewhere deep in the servers, something stirred, a counter signal pushing back, and for the first time, Dolores's steady hands hesitated. They're in the system, she said, not just through it. Inside it. The name Vantage pulsed on the monitor like a heartbeat that refused to die. Dolores's fingers hovered over the keyboard, the room around her dissolving into anxious silence. Edward leaned forward, his voice tight. What is that? Dolores didn't look up. It's them. The real operator behind everything. Maria stepped back, clutching her chest. You mean they're still connected? Dolores nodded. Yes, but this time they're not stealing. They're trying to destroy what's left. Edward's voice cracked with frustration. Can you stop them? Dolores took a breath, her eyes glowing in the reflected light. Not by blocking them. Blocking only makes them stronger. But maybe, she paused, thinking aloud, maybe I can turn them against themselves. Jessica's words echoed faintly in Edward's memory. You'll regret letting her touch your system. But regret was a luxury he no longer had. He swallowed. Tell me what you need. Dolores's gaze sharpened. Trust. And no interruptions. She began typing again, her fingers moving faster than before, every keystroke deliberate, surgical. The screens lit up with streams of green and red code, two armies colliding. They're inside your network grid, she said. If I can reverse the direction of their access ports, I can send their own signal back through the route they used to attack us. Edward blinked. You can do that? A faint smile tugged at her lips. If they hit us again, they'll hit themselves. Maria gasped. That sounds dangerous. Dolores didn't answer. She was already moving, copying data into hidden partitions, rewriting commands in languages no adult in the room understood. Each window that opened showed chaos. Packet collisions, timeout warnings, digital static. It looked like the system was tearing itself apart. But inside the noise, Dolores was building something precise. A mirrored echo of the attacker's own signal. Embedded with a redirect key, she whispered to herself as she worked. You wanted a fight. Okay, here's one you can't win. Edward stood behind her, unable to look away. He'd spent his life commanding brilliance, coders, economists, strategists, but he had never seen thought look like this. Every motion, every idea born from instinct, not training. Dolores, he said quietly, are you sure you can handle this? She didn't glance up. You said she was just the door. I'm locking it from the inside. A soft chime sounded. A new connection attempt from the Vantage node. The monitors began flashing with rapid data transfers again, the numbers climbing faster and faster. They're pushing everything they've got, Dolores said. This is their final strike. Edward gripped the back of her chair. Then finish it. Dolores's voice barely rose above a whisper. Redirect initialized. She hit enter. The room went dead silent. Every monitor froze for a fraction of a second, a heartbeat suspended in time, and then the data reversed. The outgoing signals flipped inward, the incoming ones twisted back. The system began feeding the attackers' code back to their own servers, flooding them with their own malicious instructions. Wait, Maria whispered. What's happening? Dolores leaned back. They're eating themselves. Edward blinked at the monitors, A surreal ballet of collapsing data streams, thousands of red lines blinking out one by one. "My God," he murmured. "You turned their attack into a mirror." Dolores nodded. "Their system can't tell what's real anymore. Every time they send a command, it loops back at double strength." The final wave of alerts blinked red, then gold, then vanished. One after another, the monitors cleared, from chaos to order, from noise to silence. The room filled with the faint hum of cooling fans. Then came a single message on the main screen. "Connection terminated. Remote host offline." Maria let out a sob that turned into a laugh. Elizabeth covered her face. Even Edward, stoic, calculating Edward, stepped back and exhaled a trembling breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. For the first time all night, the walls of glass reflected something other than panic. They reflected victory. Edward's voice came out rough but reverent. "A child just saved $1 billion system, with logic no university ever taught." Dolores smiled faintly, eyes still on the monitors. "It's not about school, sir. It's about seeing what others ignore." Her calm deflated the tensions, grounding the room in something purer than relief. Respect. Maria stepped closer, shaking her head. "How did you even think of that?" Dolores shrugged, almost shy. "I play puzzle games online. The trick is to stop thinking like the player and start thinking like the code. Once you do, you can see where it bends." Edward stared at her. A 12-year-old girl who spoke about algorithms like most kids spoke about cartoons. His chest tightened with awe and shame all at once. "You shouldn't have had to fix this," he said quietly. "This was my responsibility." Dolores looked up at him. Sometimes people build things so complicated they forget how simple they were at the start. "I just remembered." The simplicity of her words cut deeper than any analysis. For a long moment, no one spoke. The servers purred softly in the background, a chorus of mechanical heartbeats finding rhythm again. Then the main terminal beeped once more. A new window opened. The system's automatic report. The log displayed in plain text. "Data breach terminated. Source trace successful. Sender, Volcan Financial Group, Miami Node." Edward's eyes widened. "She traced them?" Dolores's tone was almost casual. The redirect loop forced their server to reveal its origin. "I didn't stop at defense. I tagged the signal. We have their address." The weight of her achievement hit everyone in the room like thunder. Edward stepped closer, eyes burning. "You not only stopped the attack, you caught them." Dolores gave a small nod. "Now it's your turn." He frowned. "My turn. To make sure people like that can't hurt anyone else," she said softly. Edward looked around the room, Maria trembling, Elizabeth staring at the screens, and this quiet girl sitting at the center of it all. He thought of every resume he'd ever prized, every credential he'd worshipped, every time he'd mistaken education for brilliance. All his wealth, all his intellect, and yet, he realized, the firm's survival came down to the curiosity of a maid's daughter. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Dolores, I don't know how to thank you." She gave a small, knowing smile. "Then don't. Just fix what's broken outside the computer, too." Her words lingered long after she turned back to the screen, the glow washing over her like dawn. Edward stood there, silent, as the monitors confirmed what she'd already known. The war was over. But somewhere deep in the servers, hidden beneath layers of restored data, One dormant file remained, a small encrypted fragment marked with a single name. Vantage Core, and in that unseen space, the code blinked once, alive, waiting. Morning light spilled through the glass walls of Kott Capital like the first breath after a storm. For the first time in days, the monitors glowed calm blue. No alarms, no red warnings, no chaos. Only quiet order. Edward stood at the center of it all, watching teams of cybersecurity agents comb through the recovered servers. Police officers moved in and out of the boardroom, their radios crackling with updates. The evidence Dolores had captured was already rewriting headlines across the city. "Sir," one of the agents said, stepping forward with a tablet, "your girl's trace was accurate to the byte. The breach originated from Vulcan Financial Group and several connected firms offshore. We've confirmed a network of coordinated thefts. At least a dozen companies hit in the past year." Edward's gaze flicked to Dolores, who sat quietly on a high stool near the main monitor, her small hands folded on her lap. She didn't look triumphant, just thoughtful, maybe even sad. "Jessica Lemon wasn't working alone," the agent continued. "She was passing data to an anonymous contact operating under the alias Vantage. Every log this girl preserved links back to that handle. Whoever he is, he's been running one of the largest corporate espionage rings on Wall Street." Edward nodded slowly. "Can you find him?" The agent hesitated. "Not yet. We believe Vantage fled the country within the last 12 hours. But thanks to the trace, we've dismantled his entire network. Multiple arrests have already been made in London, Singapore, and Zurich. Your data led directly to the warrants." Edward's throat tightened. "Her data," he corrected. The agent smiled faintly. "Then I hope you realize what that means, sir. This child just exposed a billion-dollar crime syndicate." Dolores blinked, almost uncomfortable with the weight of the words. "I just followed the trail," she murmured. Edward looked at her, the faintest smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Sometimes following the trail takes more courage than building the road." The agent nodded respectfully and stepped out, leaving them in the soft hum of machines. Hours later, the boardroom that had once been a war zone felt almost holy. Reporters waited outside. Investors who'd written Edward off days earlier now begged for interviews. The collapse of Kott Capital had turned into one of the most extraordinary comeback stories in modern finance. But for Edward, the victory tasted humbler than it ever had before. Maria stood near the doorway, clutching her cleaning rag as if it tethered her to reality. She still wore her uniform, though her daughter now sat in a chair reserved for executives. Edward approached her quietly. "Maria," he said. She stiffened. "Sir." He shook his head. "No, Edward." Her eyes widened, unsure if it was a test. He took a slow breath. "I owe you an apology. Not just for what I said when all this began, but for every time I looked through you and your daughter, as if you didn't belong here." Maria's voice trembled. "You don't owe me anything, sir. My job is to clean floors, not fix computers." Edward smiled faintly. "Maybe, but your daughter just cleaned something far dirtier than my floors. She cleaned the rot out of this company." Dolores blushed and looked away. "I only did what made sense," she said softly. Edward crouched to her level, his voice lowering. "What made sense to you saved thousands of people's jobs. You've done what the best minds in this business couldn't. You deserve a future that matches your mind." Maria blinked rapidly, tears gathering. "Sir, please, We don't want pity." "This isn't pity," Edward interrupted gently. "It's responsibility. From this day forward, I'm giving you both a permanent place here. Maria, you'll oversee operations maintenance. And Dolores," he paused, smiling, "you'll have your own mentorship scholarship. I'll assign our lead engineers to train you, not to teach you, but to learn from you." Maria covered her mouth. "Mr. Kott," Edward raised a hand. "Please, just Edward. And from this day, Kott Capital will have one rule." He looked around the room, his voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. "No brilliance left unseen." The words hung in the air like a vow. Dolores smiled shyly. "That's a good rule," she said. By evening, news channels across the country lit up with headlines. 12-year-old girl exposes Wall Street espionage ring. Kott Capital saved by Maid's daughter, and the child hacker who outsmarted the system. Outside, reporters crowded the entrance, shouting questions Edward refused to answer. He let the story belong to her. Through the glass, Dolores watched the flashing cameras with quiet wonder. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't sure she liked it. But she felt something new, not pride exactly, but belonging. Edward stood beside her, arms crossed. "They'll want interviews," he said. "Talk shows, documentaries, maybe even scholarships." Dolores looked up. "Do I have to say yes?" Edward smiled. "You don't have to do anything. You already proved more than anyone here." She nodded slowly, eyes still on the city lights. "Can I ask something?" "Anything." "Why did you build all this?" she asked, gesturing to the empire below, the floors of traders, the walls of glass, the endless screens. Edward thought for a moment. "I wanted control," he admitted. "I thought if I built something powerful enough, it would make me untouchable." "And did it?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "No, it took a 12-year-old to remind me that control isn't power. Understanding is." Dolores smiled faintly. "Then maybe you're learning." He laughed softly. "Maybe I am." Later that night, as the building emptied, Edward returned to his office alone. The servers hummed gently, alive, secure, stable. On his desk sat Dolores's handwritten note, left beside the laptop she had repaired. It read in her careful handwriting, "Thank you for trusting me. I'll keep learning. There's still something hidden in the system. I can feel it. But I'll find it one day." He smiled, touched, and folded the note into his pocket. As he turned to leave, the lights from the monitors caught the edge of his reflection. On the main screen, lines of code flickered quietly, one last file waiting to be decrypted. Its name pulsed faintly in the corner. Vantage Core, status, dormant. Edward stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "Not today." He powered the system down, and for the first time in a long while, the silence felt like peace. 6 months later, the story of the Maid's daughter who saved a Wall Street titan had become legend. It was told in classrooms, whispered in offices, and plastered across magazine covers. 12-year-old girl outsmarts Wall Street hack. The genius from the shadows. From janitor's cart to cybersecurity prodigy. The world had moved on, but for Edward Kott, everything had changed. Where his empire once ran on pride and precision, it now thrived on humility and collaboration. The glass walls of Kott Capital that once separated the powerful from the invisible were now filled with light, laughter, and mentorship. At the heart of it all was the Dolores Initiative, a program Edward founded in her honor. Its mission was simple: to find brilliance in unexpected places. On the launch day, Reporters filled the auditorium, a banner stretched above the stage. Curiosity has no class. Maria sat in the front row, her uniform replaced with a navy blue staff badge. Her eyes shimmered with pride as she watched her daughter, now wearing a simple blazer, stand beside Edward at the podium. The applause thundered as Edward spoke. 6 months ago, I thought a broken laptop was the end of everything I'd built. But it became the beginning of something far greater. This initiative is not about technology, it's about truth. For too long, we've believed brilliance belongs only to those who can afford it. Dolores proved us wrong. He paused, turning toward her with a proud smile. She reminded us that genius doesn't wear a suit. It wears curiosity. The room erupted in applause again. Cameras flashed, and Dolores smiled shyly, gripping the edges of the podium. I just wanted to fix what was broken, she said softly into the microphone. Sometimes you don't need to be the smartest person in the room, just the one who refuses to give up. Her voice was calm, but the words landed like a spark. By the following week, the Dolores Initiative was already operating in 3 states. Underfunded schools received donated computers, children from low-income families were offered coding kits, and engineers from Kott Capital volunteered as mentors, and at the center of it all was Dolores, teaching. Maria often watched from the doorway of the training lab, tears threatening every time she saw her daughter leading workshops for teenagers twice her age. The walls were covered in sketches of code, sticky notes, and doodles of ideas that would have overwhelmed even adult programmers. Edward would visit occasionally, leaning in the doorway with his coffee. He never interrupted. He just watched the magic of something purer than success. Purpose. Elizabeth Appel, once the sharp-tongued executive who had measured worth by resumes, now managed the mentorship program. She followed Dolores's cybersecurity model to train incoming staff. Humility had changed her more than any seminar ever could. Never thought I'd say it, she once admitted to Edward with a rueful smile in it. But being taught by a 12-year-old is the best leadership course I've ever taken. Edward laughed. She's teaching all of us, Elizabeth. One evening, as the office lights dimmed, Edward found Dolores still at work, surrounded by the glow of multiple monitors. She was running a new simulation, a defensive algorithm she'd written to protect nonprofit databases. The screens shimmered with flowing patterns of code, like constellations of logic. He stepped closer. Still rewriting the world, I see. Dolores smiled without turning around, just making it safer. Edward glanced around. His office looked different now, redesigned with her systems. Gone were the sterile white panels. In their place stood interactive glass walls, displaying live data from the Foundation's schools. Every flicker represented a young coder logging into a learning hub somewhere across the country. He walked over and set a small box beside her keyboard. "You forgot this," he said. She turned. Inside the box lay a familiar object. The old cracked laptop. Its hinge was broken, its logo faded, but it had been carefully restored just enough to power on. Dolores's eyes softened. "You kept it?" "I couldn't throw it away," he said quietly. "That thing rebuilt my entire life." She ran a hand over the scarred casing, smiling. "It rebuilt both of ours." Edward pulled up a chair beside her, sitting in silence for a moment. The hum of the servers filled the space between them, a rhythm they both understood. Finally, he asked, "Tell me something, Dolores. Where did you learn all this? How does a 12-year-old teach herself to outsmart the grid?" She thought for a moment, her gaze fixed on the flickering lights of the laptop. Then she said simply, "From curiosity, and a cracked laptop my mom found in the trash." Edward smiled, humbled all over again. "You turned trash into transformation." She shook her head. "No, sir. I just looked at it differently. Sometimes the problem isn't broken. We just stopped asking the right questions." He laughed softly. "Remind me never to argue with you." Her grin widened. "You'd lose anyway." They both laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room like sunlight. Outside, the city glowed. Digital billboards flashed news of Kott Capital's transformation, not about profit margins or mergers, but about opportunity. A headline scrolled across one of the towers downtown. "The Dolores Initiative expands worldwide." As Edward watched, he saw one of the new training centers open on screen, a bright classroom in Ghana, filled with children typing on refurbished computers. Another image showed a school in Detroit, where Maria had personally helped install the first set of coding kits. The world was catching up to a truth a maid's daughter had already known. Brilliance could bloom anywhere. Edward turned off the office lights and stood beside the glowing monitors one last time. Their blue reflections shimmered across the glass, symbols of resilience, renewal, and rebirth. He looked toward Dolores, still typing quietly, her reflection illuminated like a constellation of possibility. He whispered to himself, "Brilliance wears no uniform." And for the first time in his life, Edward Kott, the man who once believed power came from perfection, understood what real legacy meant. It wasn't in wealth or walls or status. It was in the courage of a child who refused to look away from a broken screen and saw a new world inside it. Fade out on the soft glow of the monitors, the light of second chances, of equality, of genius born not from privilege, but from wonder.